We cite the Romantics as the first cultural critics to identify the burgeoning crisis of modernity that had swept Europe. As primarily an artistic and literary movement, artists alike depicted the fabled stories of a pre-industrialized era through serene depictions of nature, interwoven with vivid expressions of the disordered sublime world. Artists now possess the tools to interpret their subjective feelings and channeled this deep, visceral energy towards industrialization. Paintings for the first time in history were moved from inside to outside. Artists could not shake themselves from the nihilistic tendencies that Western Europe moved towards, a dearth of meaning. The ceaseless expansion of the Victorian era translated not long to the 20th century, where exponential technological growth was reignited through the demands of two major world wars. The doctrine of Enlightenment reason promised the conquest of man's uncivilized, primitive state through purging the savage and disordered dimensions of humanity and society. But, as an act of civilization designed to purify empirical endeavor from the shackles of our theological forebears, the Enlightenment succeeded in disenchanting the world, but it did not sanctify physiological ambition. There are few greater examples disproving the limits of the scientific realist worldview than the eradication of hundreds of millions of men, women, and children. Scientific insight further enhanced the lethality and destructiveness of tools of warfare. Before the scientific revolution, a trebuchet could kill a dozen. Now an atomic weapon can wipe out hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. The feelings of romanticism and re-enchantment smouldered in the background. By the late 19th century and early 20th century, philosophers began to rekindle the Rousseauian view of technological progress in diagnosing modernity's discontents. Leo Strauss traced the point of the beginning of the end to Machiavelli's reorientation of philosophy, where he challenged philosophers to ask what is and not what ought. Where once we sought to orient our institutions, art, politics, culture, and society in line with this collective metaphysical meaning and desire, we now began a tradition of the effectual truth. Man followed pragmatic order and let the ship steer itself. We lost the ability to cultivate spirit and were dissolved into relativism. As an example, the only reason we can say now with confidence that Hitler's Third Reich and the systemic genocide of ethnic Jews and minorities was morally reprehensible is because we retained certain normative functions and qualities of the pre-Machiavellian state. The parochialism of science was too narrow and devoid of any value to enable us to live with purpose and common sense. How is our value judgment of democracy as the best form of governance substantial if there is no objectivity involved? Otherwise, we make arbitrary decisions without an actual understanding of our desires. Here we seriously began to re-articulate the Romantic sensibilities and put into question the idea of Enlightenment progress. No sooner was the ground cleared for the modernist movements in art and postmodern philosophy, both forces that took hold of the zeitgeist. And before you click off, this is no neo-reactionary video where I argue we return to a militant Hellenic society with caste systems and overt hierarchy, nor am I advocating that we do away with the scientific method. It has brought us several advancements that we would not have achieved otherwise, such as vaccination against disease, medicine, warm showers, reliable and sustainable sources of food, democracy, human rights. Nor should we be quick to give into a Catholic tradition through adopting a metaphysical view of the world derived from the existence of God, sublimating our drives in alignment with a doctrinal interpretation of the world delivered by an otherworldly realm. I mean to depict these historical forces as to undermine the idea of history moving on a path towards inevitable liberal progress. As Nietzsche attempts to articulate in the fourth essay of his untimely meditation series on the use and abuse of history for life, history does not move in a linear fashion. We are deeply mistaken to draw a causal arrow between temporality and spiritual, societal, and existential well-being, even political well-being. While much of the world enjoys freedoms unfounded to previous generations, of which were paid with blood, we nevertheless live in strangely nihilistic times, particularly among young Western people. Nihilism has entered the zeitgeist. Deaths of despair have reached an all-time high. People report having little meaning in their lives and a lack of optimism. These writings and depictions of now long-dead philosophers, novelists, and artists resonate so well with us as they capture the terrifying reality of the world of industrialization. While often painted hundreds of years ago, we still are in a period of industrial expansion. Look at artificial intelligence, the metaverse, decarbonization, and electrification. The politico-economic world is far from being settled, and it's time we get to the things themselves. In your pocket there lies a phone, beckoning, demanding your undivided attention, promising the consistent neural release of dopamine in exchange for minutes, hours, days of your time each week. Much of our lives are contained to the narrow confines of social media and technology, which we use as a distraction, or possibly a substitute, to shield us from the metaphysical view of universal nothingness that pervades through our lives. While it is true, this is not a new piece of phenomenon. Universal nothingness predated the atheistic insights of science, but it would illuminate this enduring primordial attraction to nihilism, of which the great pessimist Schopenhauer believed was the true ontological character of existence. Chances are the echoing call of Schopenhauer could be heard as you clicked on this video, the inescapable nothingness and meaningless temporal progression. These deep philosophical insights into metaphysics have brought us to the end of the world. But like Edmund Husserl says, the father of phenomenology, and who would inspire the later existentialists, it's time to cut away with fodder and get to the things themselves. Let us concern ourselves with our phenomenological existence alone. After all, what has the past 10 years not given you that the next 10 years can? What have you been missing all your life that you think the future could possibly deliver? Seemingly, the question of meaning has occupied man for time immemorial, and it will probably not be given its final conclusion soon. To believe so is a rather narrow, dim view of history, and fails to capture the granularity of the broader landscape. Historical progressivism is misplaced as a narrative. The second part to this video I will release will begin to explore an antidote that remedies and does away with our 20th century nihilistic view by systematically dissecting 20th century and meta-modern philosophies that can address and find meaning in the absurd world. Be strong, be bold, and create truth.